Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to tell a little story about the dumbest academic lecture I ever attended. I don't know if I mentioned this before. It might have come up. I don't know. But I've been thinking about it. I mean, it just sort of percolates, and eventually something comes out. So, if in the course of 4,000 and some odd videos that I've done, I've mentioned this before, I apologize. I don't even remember. I don't have the patience to look and see. I just want to talk about this. And it was the Pew Lecture. I don't know if I talked about the Pew Lecture before, but I did for a while. I decided when I was doing my vibrato research and other things like that to do some work in academia, which was my original calling, as some of you may know. And I got back to it. And it was fun. I published some scholarly papers in peer-reviewed journals and things like that. And I also gave some presentations at symposia in various places around Europe. In this case, it was in Edinburgh. And oh my goodness, I love Edinburgh. What a wonderful place. And it was really just a lot of fun. I mean, there were a lot of really sharp people doing really interesting talks. And, the way these symposia work is, they have sessions where multiple scholars give conversations. You go to whichever ones you want to go to. And the general format is 20 minutes of talk plus 10 minutes of Q&A afterwards. That's the general structure of these things. And so you have the morning session and the afternoon session. And depending on how many people show up at these things, you could have simultaneous sessions going on. This was a big conference. It was there was the one in Edinburgh, because I did one in Belfast as well. But the talk in this particular case, my talk, was about the Italian influence in Mahler symphonies, which is really an interesting topic. And I did a video about that with some examples that you can go listen to if you're curious. But I also attended a bunch of other lectures. And one of them was on Haydn. And the basic concept for this thing on Haydn, because me and Haydn, right? We get along, was the idea that Haydn never used the word più, the Italian word più, which means more, P-I-U with an accent, a grave accent over the U. Più, meaning more, that Haydn never used the word più ever until after the French Revolution. And the fact that he did it after the French Revolution was symptomatic of the romantic ferment in the general cultural and zeitgeist. That's the word, right? It was the zeitgeist of the time. And the fact that he used the word più frequently after the French Revolution and later when he got to London was also an influence of his experience of the nascent Industrial Revolution, and the birth of Romanticism, because Romanticism was all about more this, more that, more emotion, more this, more expression, blah, 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 blah. So this guy he was a kid, really. I mean, he was a PhD student, a doctoral candidate somewhere in Europe. He was British, and gave a talk all about the word più. And he just kept going on and on and on and on about the Industrial Revolution and about the French Revolution, but particularly the Industrial Revolution, which of course really didn't even get going until after Haydn was dead. But, it was all full of historical generalizations and mischaracterizations and bad chronology. And everybody sat there and was soaking this thing up. And afterwards, there is the Q&A. And one of the things that really bother me about these talks, generally speaking, is that there are very few times when the Q&A is challenging, really goes after these people to prove what their thesis is. And they should be challenging. That's the whole point, I think, of a symposium like that, when you get together with your peers and they really hold your feet to the fire. But they never do that. They always just say, oh, isn't that interesting? And then privately, behind their backs, they say, oh, God, that was stupid. It's the worst thing I've ever heard. Well, my feeling was I had no reputation. I have nothing to lose. To the extent I have a reputation, it's probably a bad one. So who cares? So I could raise my little hand and challenge these things. And I was not letting this thing go. I mean, because I just thought it was ridiculous. And it was wrong. It was absolutely wrong. He's absolutely wrong in the fact that Haydn never used the word pew until after the French Revolution, after 1789, or until he got to London in the 1790s. And it's absolute nonsense. And I knew it was nonsense. I knew it was nonsense because, for example, I have the score of La Fedeltà Premiata, and I knew that if you took a look at the end of the entire opera, you see, look at that. See? Pew presto. So there it is. There's a pew from 1780. Or if you just look at Haydn's Symphony Number 40, which was composed in 1763, the second movement, 1763, is Andante piuttosto allegretto, which is Haydn's, a very common marking in Haydn, actually. It's a walking pace more like an allegretto, almost an allegretto, a lively walking pace. Pew, there it was, Pew in Symphony Number 40 from 1763. Because the chronology is all messed up, as you know, with Haydn symphonies, and 40 is actually a very early one. It was composed around the time as the first 10 or 15 symphonies. So anyway, the whole thesis was complete bullshit, and I knew it was bullshit, and I suspect a lot of people there do, but no one wanted to say anything. So after the talk, I raised my little hand and I said to him, in order to make the claim that you make, I was trying to be nice. I said, you would have to have studied every single score by Haydn so that he didn't use that word in any score until after 1789 or after, he got to London or whatever it was. Have you done that? And of course he said, no. And I said, well, if you do that, you will find the word pew popping up, maybe not frequently, but here and there in all of those earlier scores, you'll find something, I guarantee it. And I wasn't sure at that time exactly where it had popped up. Afterwards, I went back and looked because I knew it. I knew I'd seen it, exactly where I'd seen it. I couldn't remember off the top of my head, but I said, trust me, there are plenty of pews before 1789 if you want to go and have a look. And he's like, well, I mean, I don't think that changes my thesis. I said, well, then what is your thesis? I mean, he just should have said, okay, yeah, maybe I'll go take a look and adjust as necessary, because he was just wrong. I said, look. I said, listen, because it was becoming a back and forth and other people were starting to stare at us. I said, you're just wrong. That's just wrong. That's one thing that's wrong. Your characterization of Haydn's practice in his scores is incorrect, period. And he got very huffy about it. He got, because he was being challenged, he was very, very upset and started to get his back up about it. And I said, and in addition, I said, your characterization of the zeitgeist surrounding the Industrial Revolution is incorrect because, first of all, even though the Industrial Revolution began in the UK, to the extent that we can date these things about that time, you have no evidence that influenced the way Haydn wrote expressive indications in his scores, number one. And number two, it didn't happen in the rest of Europe until quite a bit later, until after the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, if you want to date these things, I said, you've got to get your history right. I mean, you can't just throw out dates without understanding exactly what was going on in the countries in question at the time in question and the effect that this had. If your argument is that these things had an impact on wider society, which led to a desire for bigger, more, greater somethings, then you have to date yourself precisely. You have to look at other things that were going on in society, that is in art, in culture, in language. I said all of those things. And you have to be very specific as to where you claim this is happening. I said, you haven't done any of that, have you? And he said, well, yes, I've done some of it. And I said, okay, what? Like what? Show me what? Because your dates are wrong. They're just your chronology just is out of whack. So anyway, you only have 10 minutes to do Q&A, and I didn't want to monopolize the whole thing, so I finally just said thank you. That was it, and we let it go. After this thing was out, there were two interesting reactions to our back and forth, which said a lot about, I think, what was going on in academia at the time. Some people came up to me and said, "Oh, thank God." I mean, someone had to do that. I said, "Well, why doesn't anyone do that?" I said, "I don't understand. Why it's not like this is a free exchange of ideas. I could be wrong, he could be wrong, but at least we get it out there and it gives us something to think about." And, most of them considered it, they just wanted to be polite and they don't want to rock the boat. And others thought that I had been far too aggressive in challenging his position, to which my response is, screw that. I mean, he was wrong. He was just plain wrong. And if he's never challenged, how is he ever going to learn how to do decent scholarship? Reputable scholarship. You've got to do the work. You've got to do the research. You can't make sweeping generalized statements without having actually looked into the facts. So I wasn't feeling terribly guilty about it, but the reaction was interesting. And, after that, that was one of the first conferences I attended. And so I'd seen it, since then, after I went to a bunch more, and I enjoyed a lot of them. I mean, really, some of them were wonderful. They're incredible scholars, and I met brilliant people. Really, really fun. And there's a lot of good scholarship going on. Don't get me wrong here. But there's also a lot of nonsense. And the academic community has a vested interest in not ferreting out the nonsense because, there's this general sort of relativistic attitude that everything is equally interesting. And if you tell somebody that what they're doing is worthless, then they could just turn around and say that what you're doing is worthless. Because how do you measure the worth of any of this stuff? The sum of, knowledge, discovery of knowledge and things about topics that the rest of the universe really couldn't care less about. So I understand all of that. But I did want to share that one with you because I just thought that was the most witless thing that I'd ever seen. And I could not believe that a large community of scholarly people who theoretically should know better, whether they knew the facts behind what this guy was saying is one thing, but they should have at least called him to task on the methodology, on the way he was coming up with his conclusions and the way he put this thing together, which was just transparently illogical and nonsensical. It was really bizarre. But I always remember the Pew talk because, it's all about Pew and Haydn and Pew. I mean, we could go on with this, and I'm not going to because I've wasted too much of your time, and I appreciate your staying with me for this. But, there's also what? Oh, she's playing fetch. That's Mildred moaning and screaming. You can't make these kinds of claims, absent an almost impossible amount of background work. Really, what do you have to do to look at every single score Haydn wrote to see if he uses one word in a description of a movement? And then what does it mean whether he used it or not? Haydn was German. Maybe he wanted to use a different word. I don't know. There's a fundamental illogic to the whole process that it was kind of dazzling to me when I saw it. So there you have it, my friends. I thank you for letting me share this particular tale of woe with you. Keep on listening to music and don't worry whether it has Pew or Menno. My God, it could have Menno. And Menno could be just as important as Pew because it means to change something in a direction, whether it's stronger or weaker. It's an exaggerated, romantic, industrial revolution thing, potentially, right? Sure. Take care, friends. Thank you very much.